Picture Sarah from Phoenix, standing in her grocery store aisle last month, staring at her cart in disbelief. Same brands, same quantities she's bought for years, but her bill just jumped another $40. She's not alone, and this isn't just about supply chains or corporate greed. Between 2020 and 2022, while financial media celebrated record stock market highs, the dollar lost 12% of its purchasing power right under our noses. That 12% represents the largest peacetime wealth transfer in modern American history, yet most people have no idea it happened. Sarah's grocery shock isn't bad luck. It's the predictable result of a monetary experiment that quietly redistributed trillions from savers to asset holders. While ordinary Americans celebrated their 401k statements, smart money was already moving into positions that would protect them from what was coming next. The Federal Reserve's own data confirms what your wallet already knows. The real purchasing power of a dollar today buys less than 90 cents worth of goods from just 3 years ago. Federal officials use careful language about transitory inflation and supply chain adjustments, but the evidence tells a different story than what you're hearing on the evening news. This pattern isn't new, and it isn't accidental. Throughout American history, currency debasement has followed the same playbook, transferring wealth from those who trust the system to those who understand how it really works. The question isn't whether this will happen again. It's already happening. The question is whether you'll be prepared for what comes next. History provides a clear roadmap, and the most revealing chapter began 50 years ago when President Nixon made a decision that changed everything. On August 15, 1971, Nixon announced that the United States would no longer convert dollars to gold, severing the last link between American currency and any physical standard of value. Most Americans barely noticed the announcement, but Martha Henderson from suburban Cleveland understood immediately what this meant for her family's future. While her neighbors continued depositing paychecks into savings accounts earning 3% interest, Martha started converting dollars into something that couldn't be printed, physical goods her family would need, regardless of what happened to the currency. Martha wasn't a financial expert or conspiracy theorist. She was a housewife who remembered her grandmother's stories about worthless German marks after World War I. So, when groceries started climbing in 1972, Martha began buying extra canned goods, household supplies, and anything her family would eventually need anyway. Her neighbors thought she was paranoid, hoarding soap and paper towels like some kind of survivalist. By 1979, Martha's hoarding had saved her family thousands of dollars. The canned tomatoes she bought for 39 cents in 1972 were selling for over $1. The case of laundry detergent that cost $12 had tripled in price. Meanwhile, her neighbor's savings account, despite earning interest, had lost 20% of its purchasing power to inflation. Smart money doesn't announce its moves, it just moves. Throughout the 1970s, while financial advisors recommended stocks and bonds, ordinary Americans who understood the pattern were quietly accumulating the things they'd need, regardless of economic conditions. They became accidental wealth preservers simply by trusting goods over government promises. The pattern emerges when you know where to look, and the clearest example comes from an unlikely source, Germany in 1923. Heinrich Müller, a factory worker in Berlin, learned to sprint from the payroll office to the nearest store the moment he received his wages. Not because he was eager to shop, but because waiting even a few hours meant his money would buy half as much bread. Heinrich's weekly routine became a desperate race against time. Friday morning wages might buy a week's groceries, but Friday afternoon, those same marks would barely cover 3 days of food. German families discovered that paychecks were worthless unless immediately converted into something real: food, clothing, tools, anything that couldn't be printed by government presses. Fast forward to March 2020, and watch American families rushing through Costco aisles, loading carts with toilet paper, cleaning supplies, and shelf-stable foods. The psychology looks identical to Heinrich's sprint across Berlin. Different country, different century, same instinctive understanding that paper promises become dangerous when the system gets shaky. Jennifer Walsh from Sacramento didn't think about Weimar Germany when she bought extra pasta and canned goods during the early pandemic months. She just knew something felt uncertain, and filling her pantry seemed smarter than leaving money in a savings account, earning 0% interest. That instinct saved her family over $800 as food prices climbed throughout 2021 and 2022. Both Heinrich and Jennifer understood what financial experts often miss. When currency credibility wobbles, ordinary citizens become amateur commodities traders out of pure survival necessity. The specific crisis doesn't matter. The human response remains remarkably consistent across time and geography. But here's where the modern story gets interesting. The supply chain disruptions that triggered American hoarding behavior revealed something unprecedented in economic history. For the first time, inventory ownership became more profitable than most traditional investments, turning warehouse space into the new banking. Consider Tom Rodriguez, who owned a small appliance repair shop in Phoenix. In late 2019, worried about increasing delays from suppliers, Tom expanded his parts storage and bought extra inventory while prices were stable. He wasn't making an investment play. He just wanted to keep fixing refrigerators without waiting weeks for components. By 2021, Tom's excessive inventory had become a goldmine. Parts that cost him $50 in 2019 were selling for $200 when they could be found at all. Tom's storage room generated better returns than Tesla stock during the same period. He became accidentally wealthy simply by having what people desperately needed. The lumberyard owner down the street watched wood prices rise 400%, while his bank deposits earned 0.1% interest. Container ships floating offshore became worth more than the goods they carried, turning shipping capacity into the world's most valuable real estate. Smart money noticed the pattern immediately. Companies with stockpile goods earned higher returns than tech darlings during certain stretches of the supply crisis. The shift from just-in-time to just-in-case created entirely new wealth preservation strategies, and the families who recognized this early gained years of financial breathing room. This isn't theory. This is your neighbor's reality. And nowhere was this more obvious than during Texas's winter freeze in February 2021, when the power grid failed and energy prices exploded overnight. Two families on the same street in Austin experienced completely different realities during that crisis, and their stories reveal the ultimate wealth preservation strategy. David Chen had installed solar panels and a battery backup system in 2019, not because he was preparing for disaster, but because his electric bills kept climbing and the technology finally made financial sense. When the grid collapsed and heating costs hit $9,000 per megawatt hour, David's house remained warm and powered, while his neighbors faced impossible choices between freezing and bankruptcy. Across the street, the Morrison family watched their electricity bills spike to over $2,000 for that single week, wiping out months of careful budgeting. The contrast wasn't about income levels. Both families earned similar salaries. The difference was energy independence, and that difference became priceless when the system failed. Throughout history, those who controlled their own energy needs survived currency collapses better than those dependent on external systems. During the 1970s oil shocks, rural Americans with wood stoves and generators barely noticed energy price spikes that devastated urban budgets. They possessed something more valuable than money, the ability to power their lives regardless of what politicians or corporations decided to charge. Energy security provides both cost savings and inflation protection simultaneously, creating a compound effect that traditional investments can't match. When grid costs skyrocket, solar installations don't just maintain their value, they become more valuable because they produce the exact commodity that's getting expensive. Rebecca Santos learned this lesson running her small bakery in rural Oregon. When propane prices doubled in 2021, threatening to destroy her profit margins, Rebecca's wood-fired ovens became her secret weapon. While competitors struggled with impossible fuel costs, Rebecca's bread stayed profitable because she could heat her ovens with wood from her own property. The data reveals what the headlines won't tell you. Energy independence consistently outperforms traditional portfolios during periods of currency debasement. It's not just about having backup power during emergencies. It's about controlling one of your largest monthly expenses, while that expense inflates away everyone else's purchasing power. But even more powerful than energy independence is the revolution happening in practical skills. Mike Rodriguez, a plumber in Phoenix, raised his rates 30% during 2022 inflation, while office workers celebrated 3% salary bumps. The math tells the story. Mike's skills became more valuable, faster than the currency became worthless. When discretionary spending falls and people delay major purchases, they still need their pipes fixed, their electrical systems repaired, and their appliances maintained. Service professionals who solve immediate problems thrive precisely when financial markets struggle because they provide necessities that can't be postponed or outsourced. Home gardeners eliminated grocery inflation entirely by growing their own vegetables. The neighbor who learned basic car maintenance saved thousands when repair costs soared. Manual skills and trades consistently out-earned college degrees during inflationary periods because they solve problems that remain urgent regardless of economic conditions. Sarah Kim started learning small engine repair as a hobby in 2020, fixing lawnmowers and generators for neighbors who couldn't find professional service during supply shortages. By 2022, Sarah's weekend side business generated more income than her office job, and customers gladly paid premium rates because alternatives were either unavailable or absurdly expensive. The handyman who accepted payment in goods instead of depreciating dollars built wealth while currency lost purchasing power. Knowledge became capital because practical abilities create inflation-proof income streams that adjust automatically to economic conditions. The pattern reveals something even more powerful than individual preparation: tight-knit communities. Weather financial storms better than isolated individuals, regardless of their personal wealth. Geographic communities with shared resources prove more resilient than distributed financial portfolios, and the evidence is hiding in plain sight across America. Consider the Riverside neighborhood in Denver, where residents created an informal tool library in 2020. Instead of every household buying expensive equipment they'd use occasionally, families shared lawnmowers, power tools, and specialized gear. When inflation hit construction materials and equipment prices doubled, this simple cooperation saved each family thousands of dollars annually. The apartment building on Maple Street took collaboration further, organizing bulk buying groups for non-perishable goods and household supplies. Residents discovered they could negotiate better prices buying cases instead of individual items, and their collective purchasing power insulated them from many price increases that devastated individual shoppers. Rural communities maintained almost normal life during supply chain disruptions through local production networks that bypassed inflating retail chains entirely. The farmer's market vendor, who built loyal customer relationships, found people willing to pay premium prices because they trusted local sources over uncertain corporate supply chains. Mutual aid systems provide services that money can't buy during shortages. When professional contractors became unavailable or prohibitively expensive, neighborhood skill-sharing networks emerged naturally. The retired electrician taught basic wiring to younger neighbors who helped him with computer problems and home maintenance he could no longer handle alone. Local bartering networks develop automatically when currency loses credibility. Communities that seem disconnected suddenly discover sophisticated exchange systems where services, goods, and expertise flow without traditional monetary transactions. These relationships become more valuable than stock portfolios because they solve immediate problems that can't be addressed through financial markets. But here's what makes this urgent. The same patterns that protected Americans in the 1970s are working right now for those who recognize the signals early. The dollar's purchasing power continues declining despite official reassurances about inflation control, and specific categories of goods are already showing the protective patterns from historical examples. Families who stocked household supplies in bulk throughout 2021 avoided the price increases that shocked everyone else. Their pantries became inflation hedges that outperformed most traditional investments while providing practical daily benefits. They weren't speculating. They were simply buying what they'd need anyway, before prices adjusted to the new monetary reality. Homeowners who invested in energy efficiency projects, home improvements, and infrastructure upgrades before costs doubled saw both immediate savings and asset appreciation. The window for preparation narrows as more people recognize the pattern and prices adjust accordingly, making early action increasingly valuable. The small investor who bought farmland now watches food prices rise while land appreciates, creating double protection against currency debasement. Individuals learning practical skills find their services increasingly in demand and well compensated as traditional employment becomes less reliable and more vulnerable to economic disruption. Smart money doesn't announce its moves. It just moves. While mainstream financial advice still focuses on traditional portfolios, early adopters of these strategies are building wealth through tangible assets, practical skills, and community relationships that function regardless of what happens to paper currencies or digital markets. The evidence tells a different story than what you're hearing from conventional sources. Sarah from Phoenix, standing in that grocery store aisle, represents millions of Americans discovering that their purchasing power is under assault by forces beyond their control. But Sarah also represents opportunity for those who understand that this isn't just happening, it's accelerating. The 12% decline in dollar purchasing power between 2020 and 2022 wasn't the end of the pattern, it was the beginning. The families, communities, and individuals who recognize this early and take concrete steps to protect themselves won't just survive the transition. They'll thrive while others struggle to understand what changed. The playbook is written in history, tested by reality, and available to anyone willing to learn from the patterns that repeat regardless of the specific crisis. Your neighbor's reality is the early warning system, and the window for preparation is still open for those who choose to walk through it.